Welcome now to the first of many on-the-record debates and discussions in which we'll host every Thursday here on The Full View. Tonight we focus on the mental condition of depression. This was highlighted once again with the sad passing of Professor Bongani Mayosi, the cardiologist who headed the health faculty at the University of Cape Town, who took his own life after a prolonged struggle with depression. Well, as I say, on Friday last week, the academic and medical fraternities received the shocking news of the passing of the world-renowned cardiologist, Professor Bongani Mayosi. Even more shocking was the confirmation from his family that the 51-year-old Dean of Health Sciences at the University of Cape Town had taken his own life after a long battle with depression. And it's forced a long overdue national conversation about depression, because far too often the notion of coming out and saying I'm depressed goes unmasked and it is often pushed aside. But in fact, it's a serious chronic condition, and as in the case of Professor Mayosi, anyone can be affected across various social strata. Well, television personality and award-winning actress Mbuli, who's also the author of Eyebags and Dimples, writes about the fact that she has spent most of her adult life fighting off the demons of sadness and depression that her adoring TV fans could never have guessed she was battling. She joins us now in our Cape Town studios. And Bonnie, good evening to you. Thank you so much, firstly, for doing this. And, you know, the thing that surprised me was that in your book you say that your struggles with depression, your journey began when you were as young as 5 years old.
Yes, so thank you, Bongani. Thank you for having me on the show tonight. I think that this is a pressing conversation that really needs to happen. So, yes, I mean, a lot of people live their lives not knowing that they're depressed or that they're displaying symptoms of depression. And that was the case for me. It was only at diagnosis that I was able to look back and say, oh, wow, I actually recognized what the patterns were. I recognized what was affecting me at this period, why I reacted like that, why I was feeling the things that I was feeling. But all the while, there was an underpinning atmosphere that just kept, something inside just kept saying, something's wrong, something's not okay. And I started to feel that way as early as, I'd say, 11 years old. But I always just assumed it was my personality. I just assumed I was a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved or melancholic or mostly tired. Wow. Because that's one of the biggest symptoms of depression is fatigue. It's just this constant malaise that you have to try, and it feels like you're just walking through concrete the whole time. And your mind feels like that, and the world around you feels like that as well. So diagnosis for me was really important, because it was then where I was able to ask my doctor questions like, what caused it? What is it? And he then explained to me that my particular type of depression was a chemical imbalance, which meant that it was always kind of just there beneath the surface, but that I had a propensity to fall into an even deeper depression, but that it began as anxiety, and the anxiety went untreated for a long period of time and then resulted in depression. And what pushed me to go and seek help was because I was having constant panic attacks. I was having panic attacks while sleeping. I was having panic attacks while just feeling like I'm relaxed and nothing was wrong. And then I'd suddenly be hyperventilating and breathing too hard, and my heart's beating too fast, and I'm feeling like I'm literally going to die, and that the world is spinning out of control and I'm losing control.
Bonnie, I'm going to come in there.
I then began the journey of, yeah.
I'm going to come in there because I want you to take us step by step. One of the things that I think you talk about a chemical imbalance, but also, of course, there were a lot of external factors in your life, particularly your childhood. Talk to me about also how your mother's own journey, who herself battled with suicidal thoughts, might have affected you.
I mean, absolutely. It's only then when I was able to look back and say, well, because when I started treatment, I eventually made the decision to go on medication. I also did therapy alongside it. And during therapy, a lot came up around my perception of the world and who influenced my perception of the world. And my mother herself had battled depression for a long time. So I'd watched her fight a battle that was kind of fight an invisible monster. And she'd speak often about committing suicide, and she was sad. And when your parent is sad or your caregiver is sad and burdened, you carry that, and you hold it. You attempt to make them happy, or you feel like life. That's how life is, and it's normal to feel like that all the time. And I think it's important for people to understand that when you are depressed, one of the reasons why you don't notice is because it's become your normal. So it's basically like the canvas upon which your life plays out. And it's only when you start to feel different that you suddenly go, oh my goodness, whoa, this is a different feeling. Is this how everybody around me feels all the time, and I've never felt this way? Yeah. So it's very important for people to experience a new normal.
And also, I think the naming of the thing, because, you know, in so many of our communities, the word depression, certainly years ago when we were growing up, wasn't even something that was talked about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's such a stigma around it, right? And when people were depressed, when we look at it now that we have a language and we can articulate it, when people were depressed, it was swept under the witchcraft drug. They were said to be just crazy, or just that's how they were born. So things like anxiety, mood disorders, or personality disorders and depression were just unheard of. And when you do say you're depressed, sometimes the people around you, and bless them, because most of the time they don't understand and they're ill-equipped, will say, oh, just snap out of it and get over it, and we're all going through something, and stop being a baby and just deal with it.
Just one more thing I want to ask you, Bonnie. I mean, obviously, we know you as somebody who's an accomplished actress, an accomplished TV personality, now an author, fame struck. Talk to me about dealing with depression and living in that world where everything about you is in the spotlight.
Wow. Yeah, that was quite a conundrum. I think being famous and fighting this invisible demon was definitely quite a juggling act. And ironically, it really helped, because people who try to mask their depression, because we all do when you feel like you can't talk about what you're suffering from, you start to put on a persona for the world. And every time you step into a social setting, you put it on. And it subconsciously becomes a part of your personality sometimes, and you just switch it on without even noticing that you've switched it on. But perhaps that was a saving grace, being famous, or acting, or being a television presenter and doing all the different things that I was doing, because I played the part of somebody in control. I played the part of somebody who knows what they're doing and who is perfectly fine. And maybe that helped me get through it for a while. But when the wall came tumbling down and everything crashed, it was a big crash.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and as you so eloquently do in your book, Eyebags and Dimples. Stay with us. We've got two more guests who are joining us now in studio. We'll try and unpack this a little bit further. Good evening to the two of you, both of you, of course, clinical psychologists. We welcome, firstly, of course, Khosi, Jiyane, and, of course, Zamo, Mbele. And Zamo, you're also with SADAG, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Firstly, I suppose, Khosi, Khosi, let's start with you. Your reaction to the story that Boni has just shared so personally. You know, as a layperson, as I said to her, the idea that the signs were there as early as 5 years old took me a little aback.
Yeah. Well, you know, the difficult, we always want to distinguish between, you know, diagnosable or subclinical levels of depression, but also we are very loath to make very hard diagnostic indications at a very young age, because we are still developing a lot. The brain, the body, the hormones, everything is developing, and we are still in flux. So we rather want to be cautious in terms of assigning very clear-cut diagnostic categories. So therefore it makes sense. But you know, also trying to understand the journey that she has painted, it makes sense that she would have you know, had anxiety.
In retrospect, yeah.
Yes, it makes sense, because what we do then when the time comes to make that diagnosis is to see how do we piece together this whole thing. And as far as she has told us the story of her childhood, her mother having had the depression, so we then come to understand that there was, you know, genetic loading for depression, in that she would have inherited, you know, the genetic predisposition to depression. But also that as a child, it makes sense that when your mother is in that condition, it would generate anxiety as a child, and to have to live with that, and to become parentified as a child, in that now she has to leave her role as a child and become a mother, looking after her mother, and have to play this, and it would generate anxiety in the growing child.
But it also highlights this issue that if it's sort of transgenerational, this idea of it being a normal, because not only are you going through this, your parent is going through this, and perhaps even a grandparent, Zamo.
I mean, it's more, I mean, I think you're particularly right. Not only is it a normal if it's generational, though it's also unknown when it's generational. And I would go as far as
this is how we are.
This is how we are. And let me say two things. I think that if we look at our society on a macro level, the amount of trauma that has been transmitted, we're seeing the effects of it. And I think that that's one of the reasons we have particularly violent societies, because there's stuff that's been handed down over generations. So the second point that I think also you're also making is that, remember, we mother from the inside, or we parent from the inside, and so when grandmother is struggling and depressed, then so will mother, and so will the infant. And at the risk of overextending my comment, it makes so much sense then that if you have a depressed mother who's very difficult to activate, that you would be quite likely to go into a profession such as acting, which is, how do I activate you, how do I make you entertained, you know? And those are the complex dynamics too of depression and anxiety.
And I suppose part of the reason we're even having this conversation is that it's one that needs to be had, and as I said in my introduction, it cuts across the social strata. I mean, the particular case of Professor Bongani Mayosi, it was his memorial service today. How encouraged were you that his family came out almost really from the get-go, as people were starting to speculate, and they said this is exactly what it is, he lived with it, he battled with it, and in fact they were quite open about the fact that it led to him taking his own life? I
really, from my point of view, really want to applaud the family at such a difficult time, that they actually didn't just think about themselves. They actually thought about what his death, they understood the magnanimity of the person that he is, and therefore what it would mean for him to be able to serve as a symbol that we today can sit and elevate a conversation that's long been overdue, and elevate it on the back of such a tragic situation. And for them to have thought, let us put it up front, so that it becomes conversational. And once we can do that, and it speaks so much of what needs to happen in general about mental illness, that it needs to be talked about, whereas what we tend to do is, because of the stigma, the shame and so on, we push it under the carpet, and it lives there, and yet it becomes cancerous.
All right, tell you what, we'll take a quick break. After the break, we'll try and dispel some of the myths, and we'll try and look at what people need to do in terms of finding support. You're watching the On the Record segment here on The Full View. Stay with us.